And welcome back to Late Edition. I'm Wolf Blitzer in Washington. A new year and a new push to try to rescue the U.S. economy. President-elect Barack Obama is proposing a very ambitious economic stimulus plan at a cost of more than $700 billion. Others are suggesting a plan as large as $1 trillion. Here with their fix on what to do about the economy, two leading U.S. governors. In South Carolina, the state's Republican governor, Mark Sanford, and in our New York studio, the New Jersey Democratic governor, John Corzine. Governors, Happy New Year to both of you. Thanks very much for joining us. I want to get to the economy in a moment, but your quick reaction to what's happening right now in Israel and Gaza. Governor Corzine, first to you. Do you believe the Israelis are overreacting?
I think every government has a responsibility to protect its people, and the terrorist attacks that are reflected in the missile firings into Israel, I think, brought a proper response from the Israelis. We certainly hope that we can get to a real ceasefire, but no one in responsibility in any country, any place in the world, can leave their people exposed to the kind of threats that was consistently brought forth.
Governor Sanford, what do you think?
John and I may see the prescription a bit differently with regard to the economy, but I very much agree with what he just said. I mean, it's inconceivable to me that if missiles were coming out of Cuba into South Florida that we wouldn't respond. It's inconceivable to me that if missiles were coming out of Mexico that we wouldn't respond. I think that any sovereign state has that prerogative and needs at times to take that prerogative.
All right, let's move on to the economy right now. And Governor Sanford, I'm going to play a clip of what the President-elect Barack Obama said yesterday in his radio address on one principle that he has in dealing with this economic crisis. Listen to this.
We must restore fiscal responsibility and make the tough choices so that as the economy recovers, the deficit starts to come down. That is how we will achieve the #1 goal of my plan, which is to create 3 million new jobs, more than 80% of them in the private sector.
As far as the deficit is concerned, if he's going to spend $700 or $800 billion in the short term over the next year or two, it doesn't look like that deficit is going to go down. It's going to go up, and the national debt will increase. But what do you think about his general approach to try to stimulate the economy right now?
I think it's a horrible mistake. I think the Bush administration has been making a horrible mistake with bailout after bailout after bailout, and it sounds like he's going to repeat that process. And I think it has absolutely dire consequences for the value of the dollar. I think it has absolutely dire consequences with regard to inflation, to the middle class, and all Americans will one day face. And I think it has absolutely dire consequences with the purchasing power of the dollars that we hold globally. So I think, and most of all, it has dire consequences for the next generation in paying for all this debt that's been stacked $1 bill upon the other.
You believe, Governor Corzine, that he's being too modest in the sum that he wants to use to stimulate the economy of the president-elect. You want him to throw $1 trillion at this problem, don't you?
Well, I think we need a bold step to restart the economy. I think the dire consequences for people who are losing their homes, losing their jobs, losing their health care, seeing the quality of their education undermined for their children, is an unacceptable price to pay in the current circumstances. And I think President-elect Obama is exactly right that we need a strategic short-term program that restarts the economy. We see GDP declining 3 or 4%. That's $400 to $500 billion decline in the absolute production of our economy. And that needs to be replaced. And so the $1 trillion, by the way, Wolf, is over 2 years. It matches the kind of shortfall we see or decline in our gross national product. And we will have incredibly dire consequences on human beings if we don't take investments that create jobs in infrastructure, if we don't take counter-cyclical measures to make sure people have health care, unemployment benefits, if we don't educate our children so that they have the tools to have a productive economy as we go forward into the future.
Your state, Governor Sanford, has the third highest unemployment rate in the United States right now, according to the U.S. Department of Labor, 8.4%. Michigan and Rhode Island, the only states ahead of you. Wouldn't you welcome the federal government pumping in a lot of money into South Carolina right now to try to deal with this crisis?
Absolutely not, because again, the presumption is that the federal government's going to solve this problem. The federal government had a lot to do with the problem that we're in. I mean, if you look at Freddie and you look at Fannie and you look at the proliferation of debt across households in America, in large part because of these quasi-governmental entities, in fact, government was at the root of this problem. So the idea that government now is going to go out and throw more debt on top of more debt to, quote, solve the problem, to me is a little bit strange. But I would say this, our unemployment numbers are a little bit misleading in that unemployment is in part driven by labor force growth. And so we actually have many more people, new people, working in South Carolina than there were 5 or 6 years ago, unlike states up in the Northeast that actually have far fewer folks working, but they have a lower unemployment rate. So I'd simply say a lot of people have left the upper Northwest or the upper Midwest to come to a state like South Carolina or Georgia or other states in the Sun Belt, because they think that there's more opportunity, and that at times skews our number. Now, is there more that can be done? Yes. But the idea of another round of bailouts with not a lot in the way of transparency and a whole lot of uncertainty infused in the market coming with them as a way of solving this problem, I don't think is.
All right, I want you to respond, Governor Corzine, and put on your hat as a former chairman of Lehman Brothers. You know a great deal about all these bailouts, but go ahead.
First of all, as former chairman of Goldman Sachs.
You're right. I'm sorry. Goldman Sachs as opposed to Lehman Brothers. You're right.
First of all, I want to frame this as not a bailout, because it is not a bailout. It is a partnership with the federal government. The fact is that the states are being forced, because we have balanced budget requirements in 49 out of the 50 states, to make cuts. New Jersey's cut its budget 8%, almost $2.7 billion in the current fiscal year. And we're going to have another $2 to $3 billion worth of cuts in the upcoming year. We are making the tough choices. But the fact is if we do that in 50 states across this country, we'll end up off anything that the federal government does. And we need to be in partnership. The states have the mechanism to put money to work in a transparent, accountable fashion with regard to highways and schools and alternative energies and energy efficiency. We have the mechanism to provide the counter-cyclical aid in unemployment insurance programs and other aspects of Medicaid distribution for people that are thrown out of work and don't have health insurance. We have the ability to make sure that our kids get a quality education from preschool right through college. Those places for investment are in place in our states, and that's why it should come through the states, in my view, and it should be strong so that we offset that big hole that is developing with regard to our economic gross national product.
But everybody is worried about the huge sums of money that are being talked about and the potential for pork barrel spending, these so-called earmarks. The U.S. Conference of Mayors, Governor Corzine, for example, they listed a whole bunch of projects that they say are ready to go, and many of them are very good infrastructure, roads, construction. But look at this. In your state of New Jersey, 2 projects. In Edison, New Jersey, $10 million proposed for the Thomas A. Edison Museum and Tower improvements. In Trenton, New Jersey, $30 million for a new museum of contemporary science. These are the kinds of sums that raise questions among the American public at large. What's being used? How this money is being used?
Well, first of all, that is a problem that can easily be addressed by giving the president, with respect to the infrastructure investment program that both President-elect Obama is proposing, and most governors and most mayors are responsibly proposing, is by giving the president and the Office of Management Budget a line item veto so that they can review according to the standards of return on the investment. They can give that kind of oversight to the executive to make sure that it isn't loaded down with pork. Each one of those projects need to be examined on its own merits. I'm not aware of these 2 that you just proposed. I can tell you that I think we have, in the state of New Jersey, a very serious review program. Matter of fact, we're putting forth right now a $4 billion transportation program and a $5 billion school project program that we have done just exactly what I think needs to be done at the federal level. Review it, look at returns on the investment to make sure that they're appropriate investments.
In that same report, Governor Sanford, Ready to Go Jobs and Infrastructure Project that the U.S. Conference of Mayors put out for your state, Charleston, in South Carolina, $6.5 million proposed for the Concord Park, $3 million in Charleston for the Johns Island Airport apron expansion. As I say, a lot of Americans look at this and they become cynical.
And rightly so, because the bottom line, I mean, we're here, this is Washington doublespeak. The idea that Washington can ever efficiently go through the appropriations process and not end up with pork is against 200 years of history in our republic. That is just not the way the system works. And anybody who's been a real observer of our system knows that. So the question is, you can't have your cake and eat it too. People saying we got to do something, and so let's put something into education, let's put something into infrastructure, let's put something into healthcare. Who could be against any of those things? But the question is, if this problem is as big as people say, why don't you just cut people a check? If you really want to stimulate the economy, just cut them a check so they can immediately spend that money. And so we end up with this sort of, it's a big problem, we got to do something, but let's put it into some stuff that may, in fact, get very inefficiently spent and may not be spent for months, if not years. I don't think that that's to stimulate the economy, and I think that the problem that it leaves us with is really substantial. We have a $52 trillion unfunded liability in Washington, D.C. So we're not talking about tapping a giant piggy bank in Washington. What we're talking about is going and borrowing more money from the Chinese and from other folks around the world, from our kids or from grandkids, from Social Security, to pay for these different projects. And I think that, again, the idea of stacking more debt on top of more debt is only going to lead to real problems. And the first problem we're going to see coming down the line will be a deterioration of the value of the dollar that will hurt every American and have the unintended consequence of undermining the very stimulus that's proposed out of Washington.
Governor Sanford and Governor Corzine, to both of you, thanks very much for joining us. A good discussion.